Live from the studio, I'm Jimmy Selesky, and it is a beautiful day here in Baltimore, Maryland. I say we just take a nice, casual stroll through Twitter. What could go wrong? Twitter.com and search. Ah! The world is ending! Everyone you love is dying! Oh wait, that's just the Twitter homepage. Okay, relax. We're good. It's just the Twitter homepage. It says here that the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that the president does enjoy some immunity from criminal prosecution for actions taken during his term. Chilling. Now, I'm not going to lie. At first glance, I'm not exactly sure what makes this decision particularly alarming. I mean, I guess I kind of assumed that presidents obviously have some level of immunity, especially given that we've never criminally prosecuted a former president in the history of this country. It seems to me that this decision is almost just kind of making official or putting into writing what has already been put into practice for hundreds of years. But based off the reaction I'm seeing from people online, clearly I'm missing something. So let's dive deeper into the subject, and I know just where to start. So, no, what did you say? No, we're not going to look at the written Supreme Court decision. What? No. What? We're going to take a look at, no, objective journalists, no. What? We're going to take a look at liberal Democrat shills and what they have to say. Obviously, that's where I get all my sources. Liberal Democrat shills. So let's take a look at what these liberal Democrat shills have to say. And oh, how convenient. Okay, fine. One of those liberal Democrat shills happens to also be your Supreme Court justice. So let's take a look at a segment from Justice Sonia Sotomayor's dissenting opinion. She says that, quote, "Looking beyond the fate of this particular prosecution, the long-term consequences of today's decision are stark. The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. This new official act's immunity now, quote, lies about like a loaded weapon, end quote, for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country, and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. Wow. Big if true, right? Huge if true. And I'm going to go ahead and assume this is true. Mainly just because of the way it's written. I kind of like the whole like BuzzFeed article vibe. I kind of like that whole immune, immune, immune. Guys, we are so totally fucked. I like it when a Supreme Court justice writes like that because it really makes me feel like this is an objective, sensible, honest opinion. So, assuming that all of this is 104% true, the president now has the authority to activate Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rival. This is insanity. Who would allow this? I would even go so far as to piggyback onto Justice Sotomayor's fears here and say that it scares me to think that, hypothetically speaking, of course, a sitting president would have the authority, in theory, to, I don't know, let's say, just spitballing here, I don't know, weaponize his Department of Justice to politically prosecute his rivals and convict him of, I don't know, 34 felony counts even, perhaps, immediately before an election, potentially sentencing him to jail? You're telling me the president can do that now? We are fucked. We are fucked, and I thought this was America. I really did. Well, look, I've already admitted that this is clearly 103% objective, clearly 107% true. But just in case there's an off chance she's leaving something out or missing something, I doubt it. But let's take a look at what this decision actually means. So, I'm not going to bore you with legal mumbo jumbo, mainly because I didn't bother boring myself with it. If you think I'm going to read a 400-page Supreme Court decision where 9 boomers, am I right? all just repeat each other over and over again, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes. I'm going to give you the TLDR. That stands for too long, didn't read. Again, it seems to me like this is just kind of reiterating what we've already understood as a country pretty much up until we got this low, where we have begun weaponizing the justice system against political rivals, at which point it actually necessitated this customary practice of not criminally prosecuting former presidents. We didn't need to really say it out loud until now. It's only because of this dog pile of lawsuits and Supreme Court filings and fraud allegations and everything else levied against Donald Trump over the past few years that the Supreme Court even needed to step in and say, hey guys, I didn't feel like we needed to say this out loud, but you're kind of not supposed to like just charge a president with every possible thing they did that you disagree with during their term. It's kind of like not what you're supposed to do. But now that we've forced the Supreme Court to step in and say that out loud, everyone is in fear for their lives because they just said the quiet part out loud. And so now the aim here is to take what has already been the case pretty much in practice since 1791 or whenever we ratified the Constitution, and frame that as this groundbreaking day in the course of history of the United States. And I'm going to let you in on a little rule of thumb here. I love my rule of thumbs. I'm a big generalization guy. I love to generalize. And here's a good rule of thumb generalization. An honest person is going to tell you what was said. A dishonest person is going to tell you what they meant by it. What do I mean by that? I mean that if it weren't for dishonest people, I really wouldn't have a job. This isn't my job. I wish it was. It's not. But I wouldn't even have this fake job of talking to you every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Plug. Hit the subscribe button. Plug. Please do. But I wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for the amount of dishonest bullshitters in the world that take it upon themselves on a daily basis to tell you completely untrue, completely fabricated, completely exaggerated, or blatantly false narratives, trying to tell us what this person meant or what this person pretty much said. It's never just saying, hey, here's a decision. The decision is, and I quote, the best way to know if someone is bullshitting you is, are they showing you the thing or are they telling you about the thing and what to think about it? An honest person goes, hey, here's a decision. For instance, I'm going to be honest with you right now. See if you can take notes and note the difference between what I'm about to do and what the people on the internet like to do. I know I'm a guy on the internet, but trust me. What I'm about to do is tell you, here's what was said. The president enjoys absolute immunity from actions taken during his term of service that are within the constitutionally defined roles of the president. That means if you are operating within your official duties as the president, you have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for those actions taken. The president enjoys, quote, presumptive immunity for actions that could be argued to not be within the official confines of his executive authority. That means presumptive immunity says that just like in the court of law, there is the presumption of innocence, meaning that it is the burden of proof on the prosecution, on the state, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are in fact guilty. It is not the job of the defendant, the person being charged with the crime. It is not their job to prove their innocence. It is the prosecution's job to prove their guilt. There is a presumption of innocence. The burden of proof is on the person saying they're guilty, not on the person maintaining their innocence. That is the idea of presumption in law. So if you take that definition of presumption and apply it to this circumstance, where we're discussing immunity for the president during his term, there is a presumption of immunity, meaning that if there is an allegation brought against a sitting or former president, there is a presumption under the law that is now clearly defined as of this Supreme Court decision on July 1st, 2024. The burden of proof is on the court or the prosecution to show that, in fact, this particular action does not fall within the confines of the president's constitutionally granted authority or role, and therefore that presumptive immunity does not apply to this case, at which point the president or former president or whatever can then be tried for that criminal charge. And then it goes so far as to speak of non-immunity. Non-immunity applies to actions taken by the president which in no way fall within the role of his executive authority defined in the Constitution. They are taken for personal means or perhaps even while he's not serving as a president. Those things would not apply to his presumptive immunity. And so with all that in mind, now that we've clearly defined this idea of presumptive immunity, absolute immunity, and non-immunity, and understanding that all of those things continue to exist as they pretty much unspokenly always have, it is important now to move to why we're talking about this in the first place. And that is, of course, because this entire decision was forced to be made as a result of this hodgepodge of allegations and court cases alleging Trump inciting an insurrection on January 6th and questioning a free and fair election and forcing a false slate of electors and obstructing the free and fair transfer of power or whatever. All those cases that are currently in judicial process in the midst of an election, Trump sued, alleging that he has immunity as president for actions taken during his term. That would, of course, mean that you can't criminally prosecute him for all those things I just rattled off. So in regards to these cases that spurred this decision to be made in the first place as a result of Donald Trump suing in defense of what he believed was his presidential immunity, the effect of this decision will be not that Donald Trump is off the hook per se. These cases are not now dismissed. These cases are not now thrown out. This decision has not ended really anything. All it's effectively doing is throwing these cases back to the lower courts from which they came, where the overseeing judge will now have to decide if the pending charges of election fraud, incitement of an insurrection, and so on qualify for that presumptive immunity or not. Very likely, those lower courts, which are clearly biased, for better or for worse, depending on where you lie on the political spectrum, but those lower courts who are clearly biased, and I say that because that's why they are in those courts. Notice how all of these cases, including the Stormy Daniels thing up in Manhattan, they are all coming out of courts that are clearly lopsided against Trump. That's why those cases were brought in those jurisdictions. That's why these cases are brought in Fulton County, Georgia, home of Atlanta. That's why that case was brought in Manhattan. That's why these Jack Smith cases are operating out of D.C. These are all very clearly skewed districts where the judges are making decisions that are pretty much entirely politically motivated. There's very little consideration for the actual law. So what is going to now happen in all likelihood is these cases will be thrown back to the lower courts where the same overseeing judge will determine that, oh, well, what do you know? Conveniently, yeah, we all agree that none of these things qualify for Trump's immunity. So, we're going to find him guilty of this or whatever, and it's going to get kicked right back up to where it started. At which point the Supreme Court will likely ultimately wind up hearing these cases if it doesn't get figured out at some point along the chain before it gets to them. So I guess the most important thing to remember here in terms of what this decision means effectively is that, again, this does not eliminate any of the charges brought against Trump. It simply saddles the lower courts and the justice system as a whole with a new requisite in order to show a former president being guilty of a crime. That requisite is that they now have to contend with the presumption of immunity. It is still within their purview to determine or to rule that any given crime or alleged crime falls within that presumption of immunity. So no, this decision does not mean that a president can activate Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponent. Because clearly, when that is brought as a criminal charge to a court, that court would look at it, hopefully, assuming that that court isn't blatantly biased, as every single court we've been dealing with thus far in the Trump cases has been, but assuming you're dealing with like an actual objective court that is not politically motivated, that court would clearly determine that a president deploying the Navy SEALs to kill his political rival does not fall within the constitutionally defined roles of a president acting in his duty. Clearly, that is not the case. Clearly, the presumption of immunity would not apply to something like that. But that level of nuance, which isn't even nuance, it's actually the opposite of nuance, it's obvious. That level of obviousness, that level of common sense is going to be overlooked completely when you listen to people like Justice Sotomayor or people on Twitter or other Democrat liberal shills on the internet that are going to sit here and, just like every other thing ever in the history of the universe has been the worst thing for America and our future and democracy, going all the way back to one of the best examples of this was that whole net neutrality thing. If you guys remember 2000, I want to say it was like 2017, 2018, the big thing for like a couple weeks was net neutrality. And if you dig back far in the annals of your memory, you'll remember tweets that were saying like, if net neutrality under Trump is passed, then this tweet would cost $148 to post because they'll be like, it was like the most, it was like basically saying that like the internet was going to be like super expensive and you were going to have to like pay per character and people weren't going to have access anymore. And it was like this doomsday propaganda about this law that Trump's administration was pushing through about net neutrality. And none of that ever happened. I'm pretty sure that thing got passed. I don't know. Maybe it didn't. Who knows? But the point is, there's so many things like that almost every other week that we are told are the worst thing in the world. And almost none of them ever winds up being anywhere close to the worst thing in the world or even anything at all. And this is one of those things. And so that begs two questions. The first question is, how many times are you going to be told that whatever just happened is the worst thing ever, only to come to find that it didn't mean anything? How many times are you going to go through that cycle over and over again before you realize that they're lying to you? They're gaslighting you on a consistent basis. That's question one. Question two is, most notably, this presumption of immunity probably in no way applies to Trump's current conviction in the Stormy Daniels case, the campaign finance thing, because not only would that not be considered an act of presidential duty in the confines of his constitutional role as the executive, but this also occurred prior to him being the president. So even under this Supreme Court decision, I can't imagine that this would apply to that conviction. That's another important thing to remember. In fact, one of the other top stories I ran across on Twitter is that the Manhattan DA's office, who's dealing with this Stormy Daniels case, agrees with President Trump's request to postpone his criminal sentencing. That is a letter here. This is from the District Attorney, County of New York. It says, "Dear Justice Merchan." That is, I kept on calling him Juan Merchant. I guess it's Merchan. I don't know. I'm going to keep calling him Merchant because I don't fucking like him. We are in receipt of defendant's pre-motion letter dated July 1st, 2024, seeking leave to file a motion to set aside the verdict pursuant to CPL blah, 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 based on the Supreme Court's July 1 decision in Trump versus United States. So there he's referring to the presumption of immunity decision we've just been talking about. In that letter, defendant requested until July 10th, 2024 to submit a memorandum of law in support of such motion. While defendant's letter states that he does, quote, not object to an adjournment on the July 11, 2024 sentencing date, end quote, his request to file moving papers on July 10th is necessarily a request to adjourn the sentencing hearing currently scheduled for July 11th, 2024, pending resolution of the motion. Although we believe defendant's arguments to be without merit, we do not oppose his request for leave to file his putative request to adjourn sentencing pending determination of his motion. We respectfully request a deadline of July 24th, 2024, 2 weeks after defendant's requested deadline to file and serve a response. Respectfully submitted, Joshua Steinglass and a bunch of other dudes. Matthew Cornholio, Colangelo, whatever. You get it. To put that in plain English, the best of my abilities, my English to English translation, Trump's team has made a motion to set aside the verdict from this Stormy Daniels case as a result of this presumption of immunity ruling made just yesterday by the Supreme Court. The district attorney's office is saying, all right, we disagree with the basis of this motion, but with the Trump team asking for a July 10th deadline, which is just a day before what the sentencing hearing is supposed to be on July 11th, this is effectively going to result in a postponement. So now we're requesting a deadline of July 24th to submit, I guess, our counter motion as to why this verdict should stand. And ultimately, what this is going to wind up resulting in is Trump's current sentencing hearing scheduled for July 11th, which will determine what his penalty will actually be for these 34 felony convictions, which include potentially going to jail. That sentencing hearing will probably now be kicked down the line a little bit, at least until later in July. so that the courts can consider whether or not this verdict violates this Supreme Court ruling of the presumption of immunity. I cannot imagine that Judge Juan Merchan will come to the conclusion that this verdict does not stand, given as how he has completely compromised his reputation in every way to run a complete show trial kangaroo court in the first place to get this conviction of non-crimes on 34 counts. And in no way is he going to back down at this point. I can't imagine it. The only way I could imagine it is if he, along with every other person involved in this sham, recognize that this entire thing is backfiring. People are waking up to the idea that Trump is being politically persecuted, that all these things are politically motivated, and it's actually boosting him in the polls. He's gaining support. The Democrats are losing support. Maybe they'll just kind of like let this go. They already got the conviction. They got that talking point out there. Just like we just stopped talking about the origin of COVID. We stopped talking about the vaccine mandates. We just stopped talking about stuff and it goes away. And so maybe they will alter their course with these new revelations and just drop it. That is a potentiality. However, I never underestimate the tone deafness and stubbornness and arrogance of these people. While to the average American citizen, it may seem obvious that people are becoming more and more aware of just how insanely ridiculous and unfair Trump is being treated by our justice system. For the people involved, for the people controlling the media, the elites, the people that want Trump out, they think, A, you're stupid, and they also can't even imagine that anyone doesn't agree with them. It doesn't add up in their head that anyone could think that they're not correct. So they may be just tone deaf enough. They may have just that much of a lack of a finger on the pulse of the American people to just keep ramming this down the line. This is going to get kicked back to the judge in Manhattan. He's going to say, yeah, this does not apply at all to the presumption of immunity. This happened before his term, and also this act had nothing to do with his presidential role. And actually, that is true. Like, I don't see how this would qualify for presidential immunity given what they laid out. I don't even have to agree that this allegation or any of these felony counts are actually substantive in any way, because I don't. I think they're complete bullshit, and I think that they obviously overstepped every legal boundary imaginable to push them through. But, you know, if we're going to at least accept the terms of these convictions, then, you know, based off of that, the presidential immunity does not apply. So I can't imagine that Juan Merchan's decision is going to be any less liberal than mine I just made, because I don't even like the guy or the decision. He loves the decision, I imagine, so there's no way he's going to shoot it down now. So it's going to get kicked back up to whatever it already is at. The sentencing hearing is going to be heard, and then it'll come down to, again, how tone deaf they are, how arrogant they are. Are they still going to try to push through with putting him in jail? And that is really still the question, because Trump currently does not enjoy any immunity from this case as far as I can see it. And they already got the conviction, and now they're just awaiting the sentencing. This will delay it a little bit, but I think we're going to wind up right back where we started, just a couple weeks down the line, and we'll see. I do believe, as I say often on this show, that the original plan with this case, as was the original plan with all these cases, is to put Trump in jail. I don't think they ever intended on stopping at just getting the felony conviction. That may have changed now that they're seeing that people aren't really responding to these convictions the way they hoped they would. It is actually boosting Trump. So maybe they will take that in consideration and back off and not go all the way by putting him in jail. Or maybe they are so desperate and so arrogant that they will continue to push forward with this, if at the very least giving Biden an opportunity to not have to debate a second time because Trump's in jail, and they can just kind of walk into the election in November and do whatever else they believe needs to be done to win. All of these things are on the table. This Supreme Court ruling does not affect the main convictions we're dealing with as far as I can tell, and it also does not completely negate or dismiss any of the other criminal allegations being brought against Trump in regards to January 6th and the election fraud and everything like that. All this is doing is applying a new requirement to the courts in order to determine that Trump, in fact, is not immune. That presumption now exists. The burden of proof is on them. It is not on Trump to prove his immunity. It is on them to prove his non-immunity. That's it, guys. Once again, the worst thing in the world turns out to just be something we'll forget about by next week. My name is Jimmy Selesky. If you like this content, I cannot recommend enough that you fucking subscribe. What else would you do? Leave us a comment. Tell me what you think. New content here on the channel every Monday through Friday. This has been live from the studio. Till next time, folks. Peace.